Well, thank you so much for being here. We are so privileged to have Orin Martin speaking today on how to prepare the soil for your spring and summer garden. Before we get going, let's talk about a few housekeeping items. Let's see, you will enter this webinar session and then you'll be muted, but you can open the chat or the Q&A function and send comments or questions through the chat. You can do that at any time. Orin is going to set some time aside at the end for about a half an hour to answer questions that we can't answer on the fly. If you would like to see the dialogue of what we're saying in closed caption, you can click on the bottom. There's a little button called Live Transcript, and that should give you a feed at the bottom of your screen so you don't miss a single word. And I want to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we'll send everybody who attended and who in fact registered a link to the recording along with a presentation a day or two after the workshop. If you need any assistance, please chat directly with Vanessa Ackerman, who is on the presenter list, and she will help sort out any problems you're having. So with that, Orin will introduce himself.
Hi. Actually, can we go back to the previous slide?
Of course.
I too have some housekeeping. Before I talk about this beautiful picture here, I'd like to do a few shout outs. Well, I'd like to do a shout out generally over time to anyone who has ever worked at or on behalf of the UCSC Farm and Garden and its apprentice program. But more specifically here with us tonight, Vanessa Ackerman. She's our, she pretty much does it all person, and I'm not sure where in the UC job classification hierarchy that fits, but she does it all, and she does it with aplomb, you know, poise, self-assurance, calmness, and as the French say, savoir-faire. And also to Delise Ware, our president of the Friends of the Farm and Garden, who is personing the slideshow this evening, but also she has developed the slideshow. And with us too is Erin Foley, our communications outreach person. She connects us to you, so kudos to them. And then a little bit on this beautiful photograph here. This is your goal. If you have a soil that looks like this, you have had good practices for a number of years. You have engaged in the 3 C's, cultivation or digging, compost, and cover cropping. So we'll be talking more about the components of soil a little bit as we go along here, but keep this in your mind, and we'll also have it displayed several more times, and I'll keep saying, go back to that. Let me just characterize this soil. It is dark, it is dank. It is a high fertility soil, no doubt high in organic matter, and it has, very importantly, good structure or aggregation. These are 2 aspects of the physical nature of the soil. And you can see it here. There are all different clumps, it's a little clunky, that are individual particles of sand, silt, and clay that have been bound together by organic matter mostly into small, intermediate, and large, what are called aggregates. If you look at the root of the word aggregate, it means to flock or to herd. So this gardener has herded their flock into a beautifully aggregated soil, and notice the clever product placement with the worm. Okay, now I can introduce myself.
Yay.
I'm Orin Martin. I work up at the UCSC Farm and Garden. I'm technically the manager of the Alan Chadwick Garden, but I work down at the farm a lot, particularly in the orchard. And I've been involved in education, experiential apprenticeship style education for the last 43 years or so. In fact, I don't remember a time where I wasn't doing this kind of stuff. So we can go on from this humble brag here. More importantly, this event, as we have had many this last pandemic months, and we have many over the years, we will have many going forward. And I look forward to when they're in person and you're up at Farm and Garden. We're all talking to you about farming and gardening. But this event is brought to you by the Friends of the Farm and Garden. They are our university support or affiliates group. And they support us in so many ways. And I would encourage you to think about becoming a member of the Friends of the Farm and Garden, for there are perks. For those of you who live in the area, you can see here a number of nurseries in the area. North County and Central County will offer you a 10% discount. There's also a quarterly newsletter that the aforementioned Erin Foley puts together. She gives us deadlines and we write articles, and she puts other information in it. And it's really a useful, utilitarian publication. So there are perks to becoming Friends members. Is the next slide. Yeah. Another perk to being a member of the Friends of the Farm and Garden is that you get early entry and a discount at our annual plant sale. Sadly, we did not have it last year. Somewhat happily, we're having it this year. I say somewhat happily because it's going to be socially distanced and a bit remote, but it's happening. More on that later. But the real reason I would encourage you to join the Friends of the Farm and Garden is simply to support our work. The staff of the UCSC Farm and Garden, under the big umbrella of CASFAS, the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, teaches people how to grow food and flowers and fruit organically. And I'm sure you'd want to support that. Next. Okay, on the left, bulleted agenda items of what it is we're gonna do and say and launch into today. And I'm more used to being out in the garden, in the fields, in the orchards with a group of people standing with me. And I talk about the craft, the science-infused craft of farming and gardening and orcharding. And then we plunge into some related activities. That can't be happening now. But I sure do wish you were here, which is why I had at least put here below the melodic lines here, the blue letters, wish you were here. If you click on that, you'll get this killer cover of an old Pink Floyd song. Let me note, I never was a big Pink Floyd fan, but the song is Wish You Were Here. And it's searing and goes to the soul, and it's really evocative of how I know I feel, and I bet a lot of you feel. If I drone on in a boring fashion, you can just mute me and listen to it. But it's this group called Larkin Poe. It's two sisters, and they're not twins, but they might as well be because their phrasing is as one, but their breath patterns are as one. And it's an acoustic version of this of Wish You Were Here. And one of them plays a really mean slide guitar. So wish you were here. Hope you'll be here soon. The fall or winter, we'll see us live again, I hope. Let's move on. Okay, we're going to talk largely about soil. Then we'll talk a little bit about plants. So I'm talking about soil. And that is just to kind of lead up to talking to you about participating in our plant sale, and I'm going to overview some of my faves that we're carrying in our inventory. And soil is critically important, obviously, but so is the sun. You've got to have a minimum of 6 to 8 hours of sunlight to be able to successfully grow most flowers, fruits, and vegetables. This is a nice little graphic here. The left side is facing south. You want to, okay, do this. Go outside. Look around, pace about, track the sun, good time of year to do that. Do you have, what part of your yard or property has at least 6 to 8 hours of sun? Why all this emphasis on sun? Photosynthesis. Basically, photosynthesis or energy from the sun, along with water and nutrients from the soil, grows the plants. So soil and photosynthesis should be our highest national priorities. Okay, next, please. Oh, let me also add that if by chance, now if you're going out and buying a piece of ground, a farm or orchard, that's great. You have a lot of criteria in terms of selecting. This is what I'm looking for. You live in a house, the site kind of selects you. But if you have a slight south-facing slope, maybe less than 4 or 8 degrees, something like that, in the Northern Hemisphere, the opposite in the Southern Hemisphere, but we're in the Northern Hemisphere. So let's say a south-facing slope. That is going to be an appreciably warmer microclimate. The sun's rays will hit the ground in a more concentrated fashion, and it will deliver more sunlight energy and give you warmer air and soil temperatures. Okay, next slide. This is maybe a good news, bad news slide. More on this in a minute here, but basically soil is derived out of rocks. And a little bit of a sad tale, maybe, I don't know. It depends on your soil. I have a little colloquialism I use here. What you got determines what you're gonna get. Okay, let's break that down and make it a little more sensible. That means, what type of rocks was your soil formed out of? And some rocks are more fertile, that is, they have mineral nutrients and more mineral nutrients in them, things like calcium, phosphorus, potassium, copper. There's 17 different elements that plants need to grow. And some rocks are just more fertile, as it were, in that regard. But don't despair. You can take the most wretched of soils and improve it. But your base fertility is rock-based, and it's predetermined by what kind of rocks your soil broke down out of. A little more on that in a few minutes. Next, please. Okay, here we have a pie diagram of the 4 components of soil. And it's flat, and it's kind of boring. But I say, no. Okay, Delise, go back to the original slide with worm here.
Oh, back to the worms.
I'm gonna make her do this.
Da, 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 da.
That diagram is this. This is that diagram. This is a 3-dimensional version of that 2-dimensional diagram. Let's go back to the pie diagram and break it down, as they say. Okay, so when you pick up a handful of soil, only half of that volume is actually solid material, as represented in this pie diagram by the right side. And it has 2 components to the solids. Most of it, as illustrated here, 45%, are mineral particles. I jokingly call that rock flour, F-L-O-U-R, or rock dust. Again, soil is largely formed from rocks over geological time. They're broken down by weathering, physical, chemical, and biological action to get what we call, hey, look, it's soil. And again, what rocks were your soils formed out of? That will determine your inherent base fertility and also your texture. Texture is a reference to, is it a sandy soil, a silty soil, or clay soil? Sandy soils have large particles, silt intermediate, clay very small particles. Sandy soils don't have a lot of fertility, don't hold water well. Clay soils, on the other hand, hold both water and fertility well, sometimes can be too sticky and need to be opened up through cultivation. But the rocks your soil is formed out determines the texture and also the nutrient fertility. Some rocks are more fertile than others, as I mentioned. Darker colored rocks that are fine grained, like basalt, vermiculite, mica, give rise to fertile clays rich in nutrients. On the other hand, this is the bad news part of the deal. Lighter colored rocks that are really coarse textured, granite, quartz, sandstone, mudstone, usually give rise to sandy soils that are not that fertile and maybe even very infertile. Granite, on the other hand, also can give you a type of clay called kaolinite, which is actually an infertile clay. Not all clays are fertile. So how do you know what rocks your soil was formed out of? You can look around and see if there's any rock outcroppings in your area. You can talk to anybody who knows even just some basic geology, and they can tell you that. The USDA has county soil maps, and you can read all about the soils of whatever county you're in, and somewhere in there, it will it actually is very specific. For instance, we can find the Chadwick Garden and the UCSC farm. You can find your backyard on, and you can find out what are the basic underlying rocks in that soil that was formed out, if it was formed in place, not all soils are, or what rocks, if that's a deposited soil, were they formed out of, wherever they formed like that. Talk to growers, talk to farmers, talk to good gardeners. You get to know a little bit about the basic fertility and the texture of the soils in your area. Okay, so we have half of this handful of soil that is a solid component. And most of that, 95% of it about, is rock derived, rock flour, rock dust. And there's a small but mighty fraction at the bottom, organic matter. Organic matter is basically anything that was once alive, principally plant debris in stages of decomposition, eventually being stabilized and known by the term humus. Just means it's resistant to further decay. So plant material above ground, below ground. There are basically the soul of your soil is your organic matter. And within that, the soul of that is the microbial population in your soil, the biological component in your soil. And these organisms proliferate under good conditions. If you have good practices, good cultivation, composting, cover cropping practices, you treat the soil good. And they do their thing. Their thing is to decompose organic matter, to immobilize nutrients in their body so it doesn't leach down in the soil profile, especially nitrogen. And then they die. Some of them live minutes or hours, and they're good foot soldiers. They give it up, as it were. Their corpses, as it were, add to the organic matter of a soil content. You see here, it's representative organisms, 10%. I've seen figures as high as 20% of your organic matter is the remains of microbes, and they're really small. And how cool is that? And plant roots are valuable contributors as well. Organic matter is the soul of your soil. It does so many things. It attracts and holds nutrients and gives them up gently, slowly over time, so they don't leach downward in the profile. And so it's a mighty fraction, but its importance in the soil far outweighs its small percentage. It is, along with microbial action and exudates, probably largely responsible for creating, again, good structure or good aggregation in the soil, as I referenced in that photograph previously. So you've got mineral particles and you've got organic matter. That comprises the solid component of your soil. But that's only half the soil. What's up with the other half? The other half of the soil's volume should be what are called pore spaces, or the spaces or the gaps between the solid particles of mineral and organic matter. Scientists call them interstitial spaces or voids, cold lingo. But the pore space, what goes on in the pore space? Well, a hell of a lot. Initially, as represented by this diagram, that's where water and air reside. And this proportion of half of the soil's volume is occupied by pore space. And in that pore space, 25% of the total volume, or 50% of the 50%, is air, and the other half is water. Air and water are vitally important. Let's go over it a little bit. What's the importance of air in the soil? Principally, it's the same as the atmospheric air. It's got about 20% oxygen. Root growth is a highly aerobic process, requires oxygen, fuel it. Microbes are enormously aerobic. You need tons and tons of oxygen. So having a good pore space in the soil that has a good amount of air in it will fuel the aerobic nature of your soil in terms of root growth and microbial life. The microbes break down organic matter, make nutrients available. And then the other half of that pore space should be occupied by water. Plants are basically just supported columns of water. They're about 80, 85, 90% water encased by some cellulose like that. And importantly, there's a lot of things that water does in a plant. It keeps the plants upright, it keeps them cool, but importantly, the way that nutrients get into plants is first the nutrients that are in your compost, or if you use organic fertilizer, or in the mineral component of your soil, need to be dissolved into the soil water, which is called soil solution. And basically nutrients hitchhike a ride up into the plant in water. So it's very important. So you have the 4 components of soil: mineral, organic matter, air, and water. Half of a given volume of soil, that classic handful of soil, is solid, half is pore spaces or air spaces. Having a setup like this means you have an almost ideal soil, like that soil in the original picture. Additionally, I'm going to make a statement here. Plant roots do not grow in soil. What? They grow in the interstitial spaces or the pores between the solids. So if you have a really tight soil that does not have adequate pore space, it makes it very difficult for the roots to penetrate through the soil to grow and forage for water and nutrients. Whereas if you have a soil as thus depicted with good pore space, the roots can just move easily through the soil, go to their fullest extent, extract, bring up water and nutrients to grow the plant. So you're making it easier on your plants. That is, they have to expend less caloric energy in growing and pushing through the soil, and can spend more of it taking up water and nutrients and growing the plant. So this is what you're shooting for. And I have this thing I've coined called the 3 C's: cultivation, which is another word for tillage or digging or plowing; cultivation, compost, and cover crops. These are the 3 drivers of any organic, sustainable system, growing system. Doesn't matter if it's a little backyard post-stamped garden or a section of wheat in Kansas. A section of wheat is 640 acres or 1 square mile. And if you were a Kansas wheat grower, you'd probably have hundreds or thousands of sections. So the principles are the same. Of course, your tools will be radically different depending on your scale, but you create a soil like this by having good cultivation techniques. We'll talk more about some pros and cons in that regard as we go along here. And by adding compost and growing cover crops and turning them into the soil as a green manure. You should think about adding compost frequently, at least once a year. It would be more preferred to add it every time you turn a crop over, take it out, work the soil, and put a crop in. We'll talk a little more on compost application rates later. So your goal is to create a soil like this. A soil like this has good structure. Your texture, sand, silt, or clay is given. You can't change it. It's because of the rocks the soil was formed out. Structure is something you can improve or degrade depending on your practice. If you use the 3 C's judiciously, you can really improve structure or aggregation. So let's go to the next slide. This is obviously bread. This is not any bread. This is bread from Companion Bakery in Santa Cruz, owned by Erin Justice, who was herself an apprentice to UCSC Farm and Garden in 2005, but obviously went on to bigger and better things. The loaf on the left is light and fluffy, really good for picnic sandwiches. The loaf on the right is kind of my lifeblood. It's walnut loaf. It's to die for. But the reason I have these here is not so much to promo for Companion Bakery, although that's a good thing to do, is that this is a little bit of to get an image of what your good soil structure would look like. You can see it's really marbled and pebbled. There's lots of nooks and crannies. I have to credit Delise. She came up with it. Hey, look, lots of nooks and crannies. Got air spaces and all that. It just gets you an idea. This is another rendering of what that soil of the warm looks like. This is another rendering of what that pie diagram we just looked at is like. Okay, next slide. Okay, back to a few kind of boring, flat things here. This is a configuration of soil structure. And again, soil aggregation or good structure refers to you have a soil is composed of individual particles of sand, silt, and clay. Sand is large, silt intermediate, clay is small. And if you can bind them together, and you can do that by having good practices. And I will say right here that to begin the process of aggregation and creating good structure in soil, cultivation or digging can be a good tool. Anything that forces gentle contacts with the soil, and I'm talking about a spade and digging, I'm not talking about industrial scale equipment behind a tractor, can help to begin the process of aggregation, of forming bigger units, aggregates. What's more important than that is stable aggregates. And the way you get stability in your aggregates is through organic matter and a really robust microbial population. The organic matter has many gels and glues in it. It's a super glue. Microbes exude gooey goppy stuff, and they also help to cement. Cement's kind of clunky, but to bind together gently particles into aggregates. Plant roots also have exudates that do that. So a little more on structure and aggregation. Next slide is basically, well, actually, let's stay on this for a minute. Oh, let's go back. Sorry. Trying to run my slideshow is kind of like herding cats. Okay. As represented here, let's break it down. The big brown globs are, as the key says, sand. And then the gray amorphous things are silt. And the little bars with negative dashes on it are the clay particles in the soil. And the reason they put those dash, that means a negative charge. And one of the great things about clay is, again, they're derived from rocks that have a lot of mineral nutrients in it, but they also can attract and hold nutrients. In this case, they're holding calcium and magnesium. It's to the extent you have a good amount of clay in your soil, you will have and then hold any applied nutrients better than if it's a sand or a silt. So you've got this amalgam of the particles of soil with some groovy gaps between them. That's good aggregation in a flat two-dimensional manner. Next. This is just a more complicated version of the same thing, and we can pass on by. This is my favorite slide, obviously. I'm just killing it. But again, this is a well-aggregated soil. You can pick out and see larger, intermediate, and small aggregates. And no doubt a soil like this would have a bunch of worms in it. Let me also just say that we here on the Central Coast in California don't live in a climate that really begets a huge earthworm population. It's a little dry, semi-arid. Earthworms thrive a little better in the Midwest, upper Midwest, South, Southeast, like that. But we do have some earthworms. So, okay, next slide. If there's a litany or a mantra with soils, it would be organic matter, organic matter, organic matter, organic matter, organic. Okay, I'll stop. Organic matter is your friend, as mentioned. These are the components of it in the lower right. And organic matter comes from two sources: from compost that you can make or buy in, and from cover crops. Crops that you grow that literally cover the soil and then are turned into the soil to rot down. And these are two good companionate vehicles for getting organic matter into your soil. Compost gives you a little more straight up organic matter and carbon building. And green manures give you a little, act more like as a direct fertilizer. If you grow a cover crop, we often use BVOP, bell, beans, veg, oats, and peas. We grow them fall to spring. We chop them down, mow them up, turn them into the soil, wait a couple of weeks so they decompose, and then plant our spring crops. And usually about 2-3 weeks after you do that, you can see a flush of growth. And that just means that the nutrients, particularly the nitrogen that was in that cover crop, is available when the plants are taking it up. So cover crops add, of course, to the organic matter content of the soil, but they maybe bring more nutrients. And compost has nutrients, but maybe brings more organic matter and carbon building to your soils. In tandem, hey, they're strong. Okay, next. Nice shot. Oops. So I guess I want you to love soil, appreciate soil, but also understand soil. So you've got to assess your soil before you can know how to improve it. And there are two primary ways you can assess your soil. One is quantitative and one is qualitative. Quantitative is quite straightforward. You get a soil test, a soil lab test. And I recommend the lab A&L Western Soil Labs. They're in Fresno. That's capital A and capital L Western Soil Labs. And you should get a complete analysis. Costs you about 40 bucks, arguably the best 40 bucks you're going to spend ever, maybe. And ask for two things. Ask for the complete analysis with the bar graphs. So it'll show you phosphorus high, phosphorus low in a little bar graph next to each nutrient. And tell them you're growing organically. I'm really hoping you do. And what you're growing. I'm growing vegetables. I'm growing fruit trees. And they will make very specific and appropriate recommendations. And that will help you to know, oh, my phosphorus is low. I can use colloidal rock phosphate at the rate they recommend, or I can use bone meal, or I can use a number of other organic phosphorus fertilizers. Additionally, crazy as it may sound, I love to read soil tests. So if you have a soil test and you're wondering if you want another 2 cents worth of opinion, I'm glad to help out. My email is Orin, O-R-I-N, @ucsc.edu. And I'm glad to help out. And I'm not just doing you a favor, it so informs my knowledge of soil to see other people's soils. So that's a quantitative assessment, but there are a lot of common sense qualitative things you can do to assess your soil. What is its color? Basically, richer, higher organic matter soils are darker, as the one I have been showing you repeatedly. I won't go back there again right now. Lighter soils are lower in organic matter. And so one of your goals is to increase the organic matter content of the soil, and commensurate with that, the soil will become darker. Whatever your soil color is at the outset, it will become darker over time. And here's a little soil factoid. For every 0.5% organic matter increase in your soil, you get about 15 to 20% more nutrients available across the board. So evaluate the color of your soil. Depth, or what's called a soil profile. Soil looks good, soil looks great. What's that old kind of Eastern aphorism? As above, so below. Maybe true in a philosophical sense or something. Ain't necessarily so, as Ella Fitzgerald once intoned, with soils. For instance, my backyard has a beautiful, dark, silty loam in an old stream bed.
Did we lose Orin? Okay, we lost Orin. That's a bad sign. Bad sign.
Yeah, it says he's on here as a co-host though. Uh-oh.
He is frozen, isn't he? And he's gone. So let's give him a minute to come back. And let me talk about a couple of the questions that came up while Orin's figuring this out. Let's see. Someone wanted to know about grubs in the soil. How do you get rid of grubs? And I don't know that you want to get rid of grubs. What grubs are we referring to? Do you want to chat the answer to that so we can refine it? I'm really sorry about this technical difficulty here. I hope he's not lecturing himself. So white grub, some sort of larva. And do you know for a fact they're cutworms? I would get them diagnosed. I would get them evaluated. You might take them to a master gardener. All counties have those. They'll do diagnostics. And the other resource I would say for identifying whether it's a cutworm or a good grub or a bad grub is ipm.ucanr.edu. IPM, Integrated Pest Management.ucanr.edu. And you can find a ton of wonderful information there and compare pictures. So it could be a benign larva and it could be a bad thing like a cutworm. If it is a cutworm, the best way to prevent them from doing damage is to put little cardboard collars around the base of the plants that might be affected. And if you're seeing one or two, you probably don't have a huge problem. If you're seeing lots or you're getting plant damage, then I would consider that a problem. But in general, you want to add compost because that's going to balance the biotic life in the soil. That's going to provide good microorganisms as well as balance out any of the bad ones that might happen. Okay, seeing more questions. So it's hard to diagnose from pictures. It's very true. Orin, when he gets back to us, is going to clarify about the till, no till approaches. Those are both very important. So we know that today he's speaking to people who may be new to gardening, people who may be very vastly, deeply experienced gardeners. You might have just moved to a new house and have a new garden that you're trying to set up. And this is intended to serve mostly a beginner audience. But every time Orin opens his mouth, he speaks vast amounts of information that I never knew. I always learn from the man, no matter what he's targeting the approach to. So he will say that it really depends, the tilling. It depends on the state of your soil at the moment. So as you can see on the slide where he left us, there is a fellow getting deeply involved in a handful of soil. That is what you need to do to understand what state your soil is in. If it's a well-developed, highly enriched, compost happy soil, or if it really needs help and needs to be improved over the course of the next couple of years, because it does take years to make really good soil. So I would not recommend, and Orin and I have talked about this, we would not recommend ever just stopping tillage or starting a soil that hasn't been worked before and not till, and then try to, do a no-till process with it until it's been improved. It's something you can maintain over time after you have improved the soil by adding and turning in compost and cover crops. Let's look at the questions. I would like to know the timing of addition of compost. So the question is, I think, when is the right time to add compost? And pretty much before you plant, any time is a good time to add compost. Whenever you're turning or digging or preparing the soil to plant is a good time to add compost. And if you're mulching, it's a good time to add compost. You can put it on the top of the soil as well as embedded in the soil. So you can mulch with compost, you can mulch with other organic materials, but there's never a bad time to add compost, really. And somebody wants to know if you have to wait to plant after adding compost. It really depends on what compost you add. If you add fresh horse manure, you absolutely have to wait. And I wouldn't recommend adding that to your soil. I would compost that manure before you add it to any soil, to break it down and turn it into, basically, if it's not broken down already, it runs the risk of stealing nitrogen in order to break itself down, adding some kind of microbial life you do not want to have added, adding salts if it were a manure, potentially. So you want it to be dark colored and smell like clean stream water. Those are the tricks. If that's the state of the compost you're adding, you do not have to wait to plant. Rock dust. Rock dust is a nice addition. micronutrients. Oh my gosh. I'm so happy to see you,
I have
Orin.
no idea what happened, and I did. I'm back. Okay.
We call it an active Zoom, and I've been answering questions in your absence. So
How shall we proceed? I'm so sorry.
why don't you party on? Why don't you move on, and we'll come back to these questions.
We were here. Can I just start here? Or what?
Just
Okay.
dig in.
So what I was starting to say is after color is you need to look at the soil profile, dig a little pit, a couple feet deep, see if there's any impediments down below, anything that would require deep digging. You can do a simple texture field test to determine the texture, roughly the texture of your soil. You also can get a reading on your soil lab test. Is it a sand, silt, or clay? What you do is you take a little pinch of soil between the thumb and forefinger. And I'm thinking, now, isn't this the evolutionary reason for us having opposable thumbs? Thumb, forefinger opposition? Yeah, sure. Take a little pinch of soil. If it feels on the gritty side, it's probably a sand or has a good deal of sand in it. What's the significance of that? Sand is well drained. Hey, that's great. Sands warm quickly in the spring. Hey, that's great. Sands are droughty. They do not hold water and they don't hold fertility well. So what do you know? If you have a sandy soil, you're going to have to be pretty constant at pretty high rates with your compost and your cover cropping. So if you feel something there that's a little talky and silky, that's a silt. And that means you're good. Silt texture is kind of like the middle kid in the family. You know, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle. It's not like sand. It's a little like clay. It's like that. But silts are good. You usually occur where there's deposition or stream beds like that. They can be pretty darn fertile, not as fertile as clays. They can be a little problematic with drainage because the soil is formed from sedimentation over time, but they're good. There's some great silt soils. If it feels a little greasy, oily, like that, maybe leaves a little stain between the thumb and the forefinger, it's probably a clay. You can then take a handful of soil and mold it and try to make a ribbon like a cigar out of it. And if you have to wet it considerably first. And if it holds up longer than 2 inches unsupported, it's a clay. Less than that, it's a silt or sand. So knowing the texture just gives you a little key onto how fertile or infertile, how well the soil will or won't hold water. Again, structure and aggregation are the keys to success. Good digging techniques and liberal additions of compost and the use of cover crops as green manures will get you there. And then what's growing on your soil now, if anything, hopefully something. And how vigorous is it? Plant growth will reflect soil fertility. You can smell the soil. A good soil smells good. And that's said to be the aroma is said to be the result of high microbial life, particularly not so much bacteria and fungi, but some of that, but a third category of microbes called actinomycetes, which are voracious eaters of carbon like that. Old farmers used to taste their soil to determine the pH. If it tasted, if it was acidic, it would be a little sour. If it was alkaline, a high pH, it would be a little sweet. I did this one time and it just tasted like grit. At any rate, next slide. This is important. How important is I ran out into the yard to get some soil. And that is to say, it is critically important not to work or dig your soil when it's either too dry or too wet. And it's particularly deleterious to do it when it's too wet, and particularly if you have a clay soil. So a simple gauging tool would be, I brought my beautiful silt loam in from the yard. I'll now proceed to get my linen shirt dirty.
Orin, let me get out of the presentation so we can see you.
Oh.
Hold on 1 second. I'm going to unshare. Okay. There, now we can see your delicious pie.
I can just see you, Denise. All I see is you.
That's all that's there.
Okay.
There's a million other people, but you can't see
Okay.
us.
So I have this soil here. It is well aggregated, crumbly and all that. I'm sorry about the two-dimensional flat aspect of things, but I'm going to use this to show you how you can gauge whether your soil is at the proper moisture for digging. So you take a handful of soil and you apply pressure gently. Does it ball up? Yes. If you toss it and thumb it and finger it a little bit, does it fall apart? Yes. That's good digging moisture. I might add that's also growing moisture. It means your soil has got enough water to grow and you don't need to water. Every time we go to water, we do a test like this. If the soil doesn't ball up, it means we should have watered a few days. If it balls up and then comes apart easily, that means we still got good growing moisture. And we wait a few days until it doesn't quite adhere together into a ball. I have another sample here. It's the same soil, a little too dry. So I'm going to try to ball it up and it doesn't work. And at risk of incurring anger across the family, I'm going to stop now, having dirtied everything in the vicinity. Okay, let's go back. But it's critically important. It may and very well may take years to build up good structure and aggregation through good practices. In a few short times digging the soil when it's too wet, you will destroy structure. Okay, so maybe how to proceed a little bit. It's spring, you want to garden. You're probably gonna get some plants. Maybe you'll get them from us at the plant sale in a little while. Go out onto your garden plot again. If you have a garden, it'll be obvious. If you don't, you just clear an area. So you want to remove the existing plant cover. You can skim it with a spade. You can cut it down with a machete. You can use a weed whip as you wish. You can use a hoe, I suppose. You have some choices of what do I do with this vegetation? You can chop it up, just fine pieces, and turn it into the soil and let it decompose. Whether those plants on the soil were old veg crops from last fall, winter, weeds that have not yet gone to seed, I might add, or an intended cover crop. This is then a green manure. You take some covering on the soil, cover crop, and turn it into soil. It is a green manure. It will increase the organic matter content and the nutrient content of your soil, make the soil much easier to work. It'll probably take about 2 or 3 weeks for that stuff to readily break down at this time of year. And you should not plant into a soil if you turn green material in until basically all the material is no longer visible. The warmer in biological and chemical systems, the warmer it is, the quicker things happen. The warmer it is, the quicker this material will break down. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is you can skim it off, take it and make compost out of it, apply a previously made compost to the soil and spread it on the surface. A third technique you can use, which is gaining more favor these days, both in gardens and on farms. And in fact, Christophe Bernau and Kelly are trying this down at the farm garden, is to take your existing cover crop and mow it, or chop it down, chop it up, and tarp it over and let it sit for a number of weeks, 2-3 weeks like that. Sometimes if you don't have too much plant thatch, you could maybe even just plant, and you have a good soil already, you don't need to dig, you could just plant into it. Big transplants work better, not so much small seeds like that. Or you could then turn that material into the ground. So you have a few options of how are you going to handle the material that's on your plant material that's on your soil, and then delineate a bed, the space you want to grow in. We use rectilinear beds about 4 feet wide, X feet long, and we use a style of digging called single digging. You can do that. You can do lighter cultivation or just forking. It really depends on a couple of things: the stage of development of your soil, how good it is or not, and your physical stamina and desire to get sweaty like that. But whatever your bed dimensions are, pre-spread compost on it before you till or cultivate or dig. And in doing that, it's just a labor saving step. And whatever depth you dig to, 4 inches, 6 inches, a foot, 18 inches, that compost that's on the surface will be relatively uniformly incorporated into the soil vertically over the depth that you dig. So it serves two functions. It opens up and conditions the soil, increases its pore space and aggregation at depth, and you're adding compost, which has nutrients, so you're providing nutrients in the soil profile. Just let the chickens out or the weeder geese. It's kind of funny, but kind of not funny. You can use chickens or weeder geese to kind of control vegetation in your garden. A little caveat, they like everything. But we used to use weeder geese in our orchard in the early years, in the 70s and early 80s at the farm. They're cute as the dickens. And they eat grasses, which can be a huge problem in orchard situations. And everything was great until they found the garden and we had to fence them. So, as you wish. Next. As I said, compost is one of the two sources of organic matter, critical. You can make your own. This sometimes proves to be a problem for the home gardener, or you can purchase it and buy it in. You can buy bag compost at garden centers and such. And you can also buy bag manure that's aged. And there are some blends that are okay to pretty good, not great. And they're going to cost you a pretty penny, maybe as much as $15 for 2 cubic yards. Right now, the garden centers have an organic certified composted chicken manure that runs $10 for 30 pounds. There's a product called Bumper Crop Soil Builder, which is a pretty good compost, 2 cubic feet for $10. And another one called Farmyard Blend, similarly priced. So the little blue thing to the left is a compost calculator. And it'll tell you if you want to put compost on at this rate, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, this is how many cubic feet you'll need. And don't blanch too much when you figure out how much that's going to cost you if you're going to put compost on at a rate of 1 to 3 inches. Quite pricey. But you also can buy compost in this area in Santa Cruz County from Aptos Landscape Supply. They carry a beautiful organic compost called One Earth. And you can get a bucket, you can get a 55-gallon drum, you can get a pickup truckload, you can get a dump truckload. Runs about $40 a yard, and it's good stuff. We've used it in the past. So if you're in the early stages of soil development, you'll be putting more compost on. And as time goes along, less. Here are 2 recommendations I would give for compost application rates. On a farm scale, about 5 to 10 tons to the acre. On a garden scale, anywhere from a half a pound to a pound per square foot. And you can just weigh the compost. We'll weigh it when it's fairly dry and get a gauge on how much it weighs and how much you want to put on. But anywhere from about a half a pound to a pound a foot is a reasonable rate for a reasonably fertile soil. Okay, next, please. Often on the Central Coast here, we think of cover cropping as a fall winter activity, and well, it is. If you have a cover crop on your ground now, it's time to turn it, chop and drop. Drop it down, chop it up, turn it in as a green manure, let it rot, and then plant. You could apply compost and dig your beds now and plant your crops. You can do that. You might also consider pausing, especially if your soil isn't really well developed, and doing a quick round of cover crops right now. And here are some cover crops that can be planted from about March on through September. Buckwheat, Sudan grass, which is really sorghum, mustard, clovers, cowpeas, and annual rye. The quickest is buckwheat. In about 30, 40 days, you'll get a nice stand of a 3-foot tall plant bedecked with beautiful flowers that are hugely attractive to honeybees that can be chopped and turned into soil and decomposed very quickly. Sudan grass is a monster. In about as little as 5 to 6 weeks, you'll get waist high, chest high grass stand. Take it when it's maybe 2 or 3 feet tall, chop it up, turn it into the soil. Mustard is good. You just have to make sure that it doesn't seed and become an incredible weed. Clovers are great. They just don't thrive in our Central Coast semi-arid climate that well. Cowpeas are more for the south. Annual rye is about the only grass you can do at this time of year and get a quick stand, maybe 8 inches tall, and turn it into the soil. Okay, so cover crops protect the surface of the soil. They also sequester nutrients. Grasses particularly are good at grabbing nitrogen and holding it so it doesn't leach down in the soil. Legumes, vetch, clover, bell beans and such fix atmospheric nitrogen, so you get a net gain of nitrogen into the soil. Okay, next slide. We'll go Shakespearean on you, a la Hamlet. To till or not to till, that is the question whether it's nobler, ... The issue of whether to dig or till or plow or not is a really controversial, appropriately controversial and hot topic these days. No doubt there's a massive amount of evidence showing that our large-scale industrial mechanical agriculture is A, degrading and depleting soil, and B, contributing largely to greenhouse gas emissions. So you might want to think about a more moderate approach to cultivation. Again, you have to assess your starting point. What stage of development is my soil at? Because digging or cultivation is a powerful tool. If used well and judiciously, it can really help rapidly, and especially if you use a raised bed system, can help rapidly catapult the physical nature of the soil, its structure and its aggregation, as well as the fertility of the soil forward. If done when the soil is too wet, if done too often, if done in a poorly skilled manner, it can be extremely detrimental. So what I suggest is getting a handle on assessing your soil. Where's it at? Beginning, mid, or well-developed? If you're in the beginning or even middle stages, you might have to do some digging for a number of years. If you have a really wretched compacted soil, or clay soil, or sooty sandy soil, doesn't hold anything, then the addition of compost and green manures, and liberally in those situations, will open, in conjunction with deep digging, double digging, will open that soil up and deepen it and make it suitable for plant growth rapidly. How rapidly, it's hard to say. 2, 3, 4 years, perhaps, and then you could back off and do some lighter cultivation. There's a tool called the broad fork, which is just a big, wide fork with about 5 or 6 tines like that, and you can plunge it into the soil, lean back on it, and you just gently lever the soil up. It's a lighter form of cultivation. In the Chadwick Garden, sometimes we do something analogous to that by standing on the side of the bed and using a garden fork to lightly fracture the soil and mix the compost in. So be realistic. Your soil may need considerable deep cultivation. Figure out how much it needs. Figure out a way to get trained and do it skillfully under the right conditions, i.e. not too wet, not too dry, and then go forward and see about the notion of maybe backing off over time. Okay. There you go. There's some stuff on soil. So now I'm going to pivot, segue into stuff about the plant sale. We are offering tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, not so much corn and squash or beans. We have tons of flowers. We've got all kind of greens, a whole mess of greens for you. So crops that are, and we were also offering a lot of winter squash, and in a little while, Elise is going to talk to you about one of our upcoming workshops called Grow Along, and we're going to be featuring winter squash. So you can get winter squash starts from us, and it is a satisfying crop, and it is a foodstuff to have in the fall, winter. So my point here, and there is one, is that crops that are long-term crops, peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, winter squash, are heavy feeders. They need a lot of nutrients. And So you might think about adding some additional organic fertilizer in addition to your compost and green manure crops. Particularly the first tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, they need a lot of nitrogen, and they need a lot of phosphorus, and they need a lot of potassium and calcium. So you might look for a fertilizer that has those nutrients in it. Corn and squash are traditional heavy feeders. They need lots of nitrogen. Beans, don't give them too much nitrogen. They can fix their own because they're legume. Well, yes and no. Garden beans, particularly modern bush beans, don't fix that much nitrogen, but they do fix some. Older heirloom climbing beans fix more nitrogen than short modern beans like that. Flowers are high phosphorus feeders and high potassium feeders. And the reason for that is that phosphorus has domain over flowering and fruit set, flower, also in sugar development. So phosphorus is an important nutrient also for fruits, whether it's soft fruits or tree fruits, like that. And greens love nitrogen. Let me just say, don't overdo it with nitrogen. If you're using a fertilizer with a nitrogen content of 3, 4, 5%, that's usually adequate, maybe up to 8%. I wouldn't go higher than that. A typical conventional grower would use a 20-20-20 fertilizer, 20% nitrogen, 20 phosphorus, 20 potassium. And those plants will grow like crazy. You will also leach tons of nitrogen down into the water table, and it's environmentally degrading. Don't be that person. Where a lot of these plants need nitrogen is very early in their cycle of growth. Your goal, it doesn't matter, a tomato, a pepper, a zucchini, a corn, sounds funny to say acorn, but a new word, corn. You want to establish a big plant vegetatively that will, in the case of say flowers, peppers, and tomato, in terms of tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, a big plant that will give rise to many stems with many flowers that are big, they'll bear a lot of fruit. So you think about pre-plant nitrogen, putting on some fertilizer with your planting, like that. Okay, let me also just say that by and large at the UCSC Farm and Garden, grow and have grown for 53 years, almost all of our annual crops, flowers, vegetables, and herbs, with only green manures and compost. Occasionally here and there, we use a little nitrogen fertilizer. On the other hand, with roses, we use a lot of fertilizer a number of times a year. That's just how weak-rooted and demanding roses are. With fruit trees, we use a organic fertilizer with a nitrogen content of 5% to 8% for the first 2 years, and then we run them on the trees on a mulch, wood chip mulch, and cover crop system. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is a sweet shot that Delise found on the internet. It's so cool. Look at that raised bed ready to have what? Yeah, plants put in. Burgeoning crop of onions on the left, about to bulb up. Monster crop of chard on the right. Looking in the background, looks like the hills of Sonoma, maybe May, June. Hills are starting to brown out like that. Ready to plant. Next, please. Okay, as mentioned, May 1, May 2 at the hay barn, the cow hay barn, not down at the corner of campus at the barn theater this year. We're going to have a plant sale. We're bringing it back. We're bringing it back small and at a distance a little bit. We're just going to have vegetables and flowers, no perennial plants this year, mostly in 6-packs and little 3-inch pots like that. Got to wear masks, no social distancing. We prefer a check or cash, but a check, and we're trying to get a credit card system set up with the university. The university in that regard is mired somewhere in the Middle Ages. Maybe by our next sale we'll have it. And we're going to ask people to sign up for time slots so we can have safe distancing like that. And all that information specifically, plus the detailed plant inventory and descriptions, will be on our CASPAS website shortly. Look for it. Okay, next, please. But they twisted my arm and said, well, Orin, on that plant list, what would you grow? So here are a few of my faves. We have all kinds of peppers, and I am a pepper aficionado. In the hot pepper department, this is his greatest hits. El Jefe, the chief. It's a jalapeno. The deal with jalapenos, you usually can get early jalapenos or big jalapenos, but you can't get a early jalapeno taste good or a big jalapeno taste good. But this is an exception to the rule. El Jefe is quite early for a jalapeno, quite big, and it is full flavor. A tip on jalapenos, if you let them go red, and there's no such thing as a mature green pepper in the world. All peppers are of color, yellow, red, or orange, variously, if you let them hang on the vine. But just commercially, people have been conditioned that a jalapeno is green. It ain't necessarily so. But if you let your jalapenos go from green to red, they don't get any hotter. They maintain that good moderate heat, but they get juicier and sweeter. If they have cracks in them, all the better. El Jefe is one of the best, maybe. There's another one that we're not offering this year called Biker Billy from Burpee that's just about as good as this, but El Jefe is a very good jalapeno. Padrones, you're probably all familiar with the Spanish pepper padrone now. You just take them and saute them, roast them a little bit in some olive oil, add a little salt, and they're all kind of good. There's no reason you should pay $5-6 for a strawberry basket size packet of padrones. Buy a 6-pack. You will have enough to feed your family and your neighborhood. They're really easy to grow. They're small, and you take them when they're immature and green, so they ripen readily in Santa Cruz. I've had I've had padrones that started cropping in the middle third week in July and went all the way into December. They're insane. They actually can get quite tall, maybe head high like that. They're extremely prolific. Another similar thing to the padrone would be the shishito, which is Japan's answer to Spain's padrone. They're slightly elongated and ribbed, and this mellow star is the variety of choice. You treat them in the same manner as the padrones. Hot lantern, for those of you chili heads out there who like hot peppers, you can't really grow habaneros in this climate. They get about this tall and have one cute little habanero fruit on them. But hot lantern, which is from Johnny's Seeds, is a really good cool season habanero, if you like that exotic taste of heat and tropical fruits, and it'll grow well for you here. In the sweet pepper department, if you live on the coast, it can be a little dicey trying to mature big bell peppers, but lipstick and apple are two good cool season, short season substitutes. I believe the lower slide here is a not quite fully red apple or lipstick. They're small, 3 to 5 inches, conical, sweet as the sweetest bell pepper you ever had. Highly productive, maybe 50, 60 fruits per plant, and early and reliable on the coast. They do well inland too. Carmen and Escamillo, probably depicted with this slide that's elongate, the one that's on the right top. They are classic Corno de Toro bullhorn peppers, and they're probably the best of the modern bullhorns. Carmen is red, Escamillo is yellow. And they're 7-8 inches long, really thick walled, and really super juicy. Good for eating fresh, really good for roasting and skinning, just crazy. And you can freeze them and bring them out all winter. Carmen, they were developed by Johnny's seed company. The owner, Rob Johnson, and his wife, Erica, bred them. And the reference Carmen is dedicated to Carmen, the opera diva from the opera Carmen. Spoiler alert, as usual, it did not end well for Carmen. And Escamillo was her flamboyant bullfighting friend, a boyfriend. So a red and a yellow, Carmen and Escamillo, they're very good. Chervina Chusca, which is available particularly from Seed Savers Exchange, if you don't get them from us, is an old Bulgarian bullhorn type that's really good and also early, reliable on the coast. Stocky red roaster, I usually say stocky red roaster and then drop the mic. It is hands down the most sumptuous, thick, juicy, sweet, roasting type bullhorn pepper developed by Frank Morton and his posse, as it were, up at Wild Garden Seeds in Oregon. It is a grower, it is a producer, and it roasts like nobody's business. Jimmy Nardello, I just call it a gateway pepper drug. It's elongate, as you see in the upper left here. Everybody shies away. No, that's chili pepper. No, it's not. It's smoky, sweet, and pretty good off the vine. But if you throw it again in the skillet with a little olive oil and just toss it and roast it and blacken it a little bit, it gets slimy and sweet, and it becomes highly addictive. And again, it's another one of those peppers. It'll produce you 30, 40, maybe more fruits per plant, and you'll fall in love with it, as I have. Okay.
Hey, Orin, you're making me hungry, number one, but number two is we're running out of time. It's 6:11, and I want to make sure we get questions answered.
Then let's do this. Put duct tape. Okay, I'm done. Let's have questions for a while here.
Let's throw the questions in, and then we'll move on to your other favorite plants, and we'll have covered it all.
Someone give me the questions verbally, and I'll try to fire back.
Here I go. If you were going to plant in the near future, like this weekend, what is the one thing you would do to improve a clay-based soil? We know the answer.
The answer is the classic instructor's dodge. It depends. I guess what I would do is go out and fracture. Can I fracture down into that soil with a spade or a fork? If I can penetrate 8, 10 inches, you could do one of the following things. You could single dig it with a spade. Somewhere in the resources here, we have a video of how to single and double dig a bed. We'll show it to you at the end. You could simply just, again, fracture the soil, loosen it up with a garden fork. But before you either fracture it or before you dig it, spread compost. And that will be worked into the soil when you cultivate in whatever fashion you're going to do. The first thing I would do is check the moisture. And again, it needs to ball up. If it doesn't, it's too dry. What do? You apply water and wait a few days, take another field test. It should ball up and readily fall apart. If you go and make a ball out of it and it doesn't fall apart, turns into a mud ball, it's too wet, wait a few days. So it's important to dig at the right moisture. Adjust moisture if you need to. Apply compost. Again, it really depends. Is this the first time the spot has been gardened in, or is this a spot that's had a garden for a number of years? But see how easily you can fracture 8, 10, 12 inches into the soil. Use that as a gauge for how intrusive you're going to be with digging. Do apply compost.
Lots more questions.
Okay.
Do you top your peppers?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Do you top your peppers?
Do I top my peppers? Okay. When the pepper plant gets maybe 6, 8 inches tall, it's going to have a tendency to flower. What I usually do is pick those flowers or young fruit off. If you don't, the plant will sink all its energy into that and not make much of a plant that subsequently won't have a lot of flowers and fruit. So I don't top them in terms of cutting the vegetation. More vegetation equals more photosynthetic surface, and it's good. But pick the first few flowers and fruit off. Or if you have space, you could grow one row that you're going to let set an early crop like that, and that will affect its overall performance. But you'll have a few really big peppers really early in the season. Have another row where you pick the flowers or peppers off, let the plant get bigger and more established, and then you'll have peppers later, more peppers, and peppers longer into the season, even into the fall. Think about this when you're looking at a pepper plant. Every time a pepper plant branches, it flowers. So the bigger the plant, the more branching it has, the more potential fruit and yield you're going to have. Great.
People want to know about rock dust and azomite.
Yeah. They're kind of all the rage, almost have a cult following. They're good sources of micronutrients. Do you need micronutrients? Have you done a soil test? Do you have low readings for micronutrients? So I just kind of put those things together. It probably does, sometimes we do things and it just makes us feel better. It's a form of therapy. There's no harm in using azomite or rock powder or rock dust like that. I don't think that all the miracle cures that are attributed to them are actually science or fact based. But if you have low micronutrients, they can aid you.
Great.
And they're cheap.
Better. So how about vermicompost? How much vermicompost to use in a raised bed? Is there a guideline?
And the answer is, I don't know. But let me say something about, in truth, I don't know. I don't think there's any better fertilizer on the planet, both for the physical nature of the soil and for the nutrient content than vermicompost. It's phenomenal. Plus the whole act of tending and raising those worms is, it keeps you off the streets and out of trouble. It's good. It is a concentrated fertilizer, perhaps more so than compost. So I'd maybe use it at a lighter rate, maybe up to 0.5 pound per square foot. A little bit will do you.
Okay. Somebody is having grubs in the soil. Do you have any answers to controlling them, or would you control them?
I'm going to say, sometimes diagnostics from a distance is dangerous. I kind of need to know what they were. They may be good, they may be bad. Let me just say there are a lot of creepy crawly things at this time of year in the soil, on the soil. One is something we call woolly bears. It's a caterpillar. It's black and kind of porcupine-like like that. They do eat seedlings and such, but I couldn't say unless I saw a picture of it.
Okie dokie. Fish heads, roly-poly fish heads. Eat them up, yum. It's a song, sorry. Somebody wants to know if you really, put them in the soil and plant a corn seed and all that.
Sorry.
It's you, I blame you.
Getting late in the evening, huh? Okay. I don't recommend putting fish heads in your soil for quite a few reasons. One is you would certainly attract all manner of dogs, skunks, raccoons, possums, etc. They could dig the soil for you, perhaps. But the other thing is it would take they are a reservoir of potential nutrients, incredible. But it would take quite a long time for that flesh and bones structure to break down and for those nutrients to be available. If you're really wanting to do this, I would perhaps do it in the late summer, fall, and mulch it over, bury it and mulch it over and wait till the spring to plant. But I don't particularly recommend it.
Okay, let's go back to your beautiful plants. Let's go to basil.
Not mine. Christoph and Kelly raised most of them down at the farm.
These are
Basil, basilicum, Oxymum basilicum. There are different types of basil, and several that we're offering this year would be the large leaf Italian, sometimes called lettuce leaf, large and crinkly. And it's great, sort of. I don't recommend it for pesto, but I like it like on a sandwich instead of lettuce or something like this. It's nice and light. But if you want real basil, real pesto, the Genovese types, we have several, are the way to go. Sometimes called sweet basil, and they're pungent in a good way, as basil is, but also sweet and make the richest of pestos. They're just highly productive as well. All caps, Mrs. Burns lemon. I insisted on that. This is a dinky little basil plant with these little kind of light colored, almost chlorotic looking yellow leaves that when you harvest, dice, and throw into just about any dish, particularly stir fry at the end, they just bring the flavor up. It's just got real lemon zest to it. I put it in almost everything. Well, maybe not smoothies, but still. Okay, Sweet Thai and cinnamon, kind of de rigueur for any type of Asian cooking. They're really great. They can be used in clear broth soups and curries, etc., like that. Just highly aromatic. Lettuces, I am an addict of the little gem type, and you may become one too. And now they're in markets. They didn't used to be in market. They're in both farmers markets and markets like New Leaf. And they're going to cost you a pretty penny, $1.50, $2 for what the little gem type is a natural cross between a romaine, torpedo-like head, and a butter lettuce. So it has the shape, but miniature, 4-6 inches tall, of a romaine, a little bit of the crunch of romaine in the outer leaves. As you get to the center, it goes all butter lettuce on you, silky and sweet. They are divine. And you can grow your own for pennies a plant. You needn't pay $1.50, $2. They're easy, and we're offering this green gem type, which is from Renee Shepherd's, I believe. Panisse, I'm not a big leaf lettuce person, but panisse is an exception to the rule. It's an oak leaf, nice lobe leaf thing. It's kind of chartreuse lime green, and it literally melts in your mouth. And it's a cousin, it's offered by Johnny Seeds, and it's a cousin to, we think they're French varieties, panisse and rouxai, Rouxaii, again, pardon my French, and Oscard. Rouxai is a red oak leaf type, panisse and Oscard are green. They can be grown as minis, put them 4 to 6 inches apart, get a little one person, one salad, one serving head, or you can put them a foot apart and get really big heads. And they just maintain their succulence and sweetness quite almost all the way through the summer, even if you have heat. You're not going to see them in markets a lot because they're so soft, sweet, and succulent. They don't hold up. They don't have enough fiber. So if you want to avail yourself, and you do, of the taste of these exquisite oak leaf types, panisse and such, you got to grow them yourself. We got panisse. Okay.
Everybody's favorite.
If you live on the coast, you have cold conditions, cherry tomatoes are easier to ripen than bigger. The bigger the tomato is, the more difficult it is to get both ripening and yield and flavor. And it's just the gamut of cherries out there. Sungold is probably the best of the lot in terms of its productivity, its beauty, and its sweetness. We've got it. Very popular and rightfully so. The heirlooms, my favorite is this Cherokee purple, as you see down right below here. Dark, rich, meaty, and good. Two things. You can ripen it on the coast better than a lot of other big heirlooms, and you can almost dry farm it. The best tomatoes are dry farmed. That is, they are given very little water, maybe it's a little at the beginning, or not given any water at all. And you get a smaller plant with fewer tomatoes, but a much, and a smaller fruit as well, and much more intense flavor, no mealiness at all. And the best variety to grow as a dry farm tomato is a variety called Early Girl. I'll get to that in a minute. But this Cherokee, and most of the heirlooms need a pretty good amount of water, but this Cherokee purple can be semi-dry farm and give you the lushness and the fullness that you want, but also the intensity of flavor that you desire. So slicing tomatoes, we all, along the coast here, it has been developed since the 70s to grow a variety called Early Girl and to dry farm it. And you see it at all the markets. You see it in supermarkets like New Leaf and Staff Life and all that. And they are, they're basically sink tomatoes. It's hard. They're tough skinned, but when you get through, whoop, all over your shirt. So eat them over a sink, or slice them politely and put them on a platter. But a number of years ago, Monsanto, the evil giant, as it were, bought the rights to Early Girl. So a lot of us have backed away from it, not wanting to support Monsanto, you know, the people who, never mind, who brought you Roundup, among other things. And Valley Girl and New Girl are pretty close substitutes. There's a fellow, Joe Shermer, who graduated from the apprentice program 15, 20 years ago. He's now farming. His operation is called Dirty Girls. And that is because it was started by two women and sold to him. and Jane Friedman, who also graduated from the Farm and Garden, and Allie Edwards, who's just a really good person and a good gardener. Started Dirty Girl, sold Joe Schumer, and he didn't want to grow early girl after Monsanto bought it. So what he did is he unbred it. It took him 5 or 6 years to breed it back to a good tomato. When you take the seeds of hybrids, they're all over the place and not very good. So he painstakingly did that, and he named it Dirty Girl. So he sells it. He's at the Wednesdays downtown farmers market in Santa Cruz and at the Saturday Cabrillo market. But Valley Girl and New Girl are very good early girl substitutes, whether they're irrigated or dry farmed. How could I miss my favorite lower right, green zebra? This is a vigorous vine. It needs support, 5-6 foot tall, loaded with tons of tomatoes, fairly early. They're like a big cherry or a small slicer, maybe 3-4 ounces. And you can see they're dark green, light green coloration. And you have a choice. You can take them a little bit early when they're still green and they're firm and a little tart. You can let them go to about this color here. And they're still tart, but a little bit sweet. There are now some red green zebras, I guess red zebras. They're dogs. No, dogs with sleeves. They're mealy, they're not very good. But the original green zebra, really good. Okay.
Okay, let's talk about what's coming up. So we've been busy. We're going to try this experiment. It's going to be a grow along, and it is going to be following the plant from birth to dinner. So that class is going to meet in a week, and we're going to kick off. We're going to talk about what varieties to grow. Then you're going to go off and you're going to start, find some seeds, and then we're going to talk about planting them the month later. And then we're going to talk about hilling them up and fertilizing them and watering them. And then we're going to talk about whatever else is going on. Now, the benefit of getting together throughout the cycle of the plant is that we can learn from each other. We can learn experientially. This is a way of sort of getting our hands in the dirt and still being on Zoom calls. So that's the idea, and it's going to go all the way until sometime in September, October, when we will hopefully have permission to get together, bring a dish with our pumpkin or squash or whatever it is that we decided to grow in, and share it and have a little party.
We can have a squash-a-palooza.
Exactly. We can squash it. We can crush it.
Hey, can I have a few minutes at the end to read something?
Absolutely. Irrigation basics coming up. We are going into a drought year. That is going to be a very important class. The plant sale, we have hit you over the head with that enough. That's happening on May Day. And then we're having our annual poetry reading. It's going to be virtual this year. We're hoping to have a video of the garden so that we can bring that energy into the space. And we are just finalizing our poets now. So that's exciting.
Okay, perhaps some closing quote here. I'm going to say something and then read something. This is a quote about soil, appropriately. These are my words. Soil is a precious natural resource, one that enables us to have food, a food system, and food security. Soil forms very slowly, as slow as 1 inch every 1,000 years. So I give you a quote from Wendell Berry. Put your faith in the 2 inches of humus that forms under the tree every year. So here's a quote offered as a cautionary tale, but it's really a rallying call, a clarion call to become intergenerational, international soil stewards. It's from a man named David Montgomery, who wrote a book called Dirt, The Erosion of Civilizations, UC Press, 2007. A guy you'd like to sit down and have an adult beverage with and pick his brain about soil, geology, geography. The quote goes like this: given that the state of the soil determines what can be grown for how long, preserving the basis for the wealth of future generations requires intergenerational land stewardship. So far, however, few human societies have produced cultures founded on sustaining the soil, even though most discovered ways to enhance soil fertility. Many exhausted their land at a rate commensurate with their level of technological sophistication. Okay, I'm going to read that line again. Many exhausted their land at a rate commensurate with their level of technological sophistication. We now have the capacity to outpace them, but we also know how not to repeat their example. Take good care of your soil, appreciate your soil, become a sleuth of soil, a Sherlock Holmes of soil, investigating it, assessing it, and improving it. Thanks for dropping by.
Thank you, Orin. I think we're going to end here.
Okay, bye-bye.
And we will send an email shortly and within a day or two. So thank you all for coming, and resources will be forthcoming. If your question did not get answered, we'll include Orin's email address.
Yeah, just
Okay with you, Orin?
shoot me an email.
Yeah, there were some we didn't get to. So let's go have our dinner.
Also send me your soil tests. I love them.
Send him soil tests.
All right, I'm going for a bike ride. See ya.
Okay, talk to you later. Thank you all. Bye-bye.